Emily Carter did not plan to find anything that day except silence, yet the moment she stepped near the old stone walls of Malta, she felt a pull she could not explain, as if the past was breathing just beneath the surface, waiting for her to listen, and the sea below moved slowly, steady and patient, unlike her thoughts, which had been restless ever since she left Boston behind, carrying the quiet weight of a love that ended without clear reasons, without a final fight, just a slow drifting. A part that hurt more than anger ever could, and as tourists passed with cameras and laughter, Emily lingered, letting the warm air touch her face, hoping it would soften the ache in her chest, when she opened her travel journal, not to write, but to distract herself, and there, tucked between pages she did not remember folding, was an old letter, yellowed and fragile, written in careful handwriting that felt personal even though she did not know the writer, and as she read the single line about the greatest siege being within the soul, her breath slowed, because it felt written for her, for this exact moment, and she looked up at the massive walls, thinking of how many storms they had endured, how many people had leaned on them in moments of fear and hope, and she wondered why some things survived while others faded, including love, and just then a voice behind her spoke calmly about the walls holding secrets beyond history books, and she turned to see Daniel Reed, a man with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression, who introduced himself without urgency, as if time was not something he feared losing, and he mentioned he was from Toronto, studying how stories survive longer than facts, and Emily found herself listening, not because of what he said, but how he said it, with care and respect, and as they walked along the wall together, he spoke about Malta not as a battlefield but as a place of human endurance, where fear once gathered like a storm and people had to choose whether to break or stand, and Emily felt something open inside her, because she too had been under a quiet siege, one made of unanswered questions and nights spent wondering if she had been too much or not enough, and Daniel did not ask her personal questions, yet she felt understood, and when the guide's voice faded into the background, the world seemed smaller, focused only on the sound of waves and the space between them, and Emily noticed how Daniel paused before speaking, as if he respected silence, and that alone made her feel safe, and she told him she had come to Malta hoping distance would help her heal, though she was not sure healing ever followed plans, and he nodded, saying some journeys were less about moving forward and more about standing still long enough to feel, and the words stayed with her as the sun climbed higher and the walls cast long shadows, and when they stopped near a quiet corner where the sea met stone, Daniel spoke of a legend about a knight who never raised a sword but saved his people by refusing to give in to despair, calling doubt and fear the true invaders, and Emily felt a strange warmth, as if the story was slowly stitching something together inside her, and she realized she had not felt this present in months, and as they parted ways, exchanging only simple smiles and no promises, Emily walked back alone but lighter, the letter folded safely in her pocket, her thoughts no longer racing but moving with purpose, and that night, as the city lights flickered softly and the sea hummed its endless song, Emily understood that the walls had already done their work, not by protecting her from pain, but by reminding her that surviving something did not mean becoming closed, and as she lay awake, thinking of Daniel's voice and the line from the letter, she sensed that her time in Malta had only just begun, and whatever secret waited within those ancient stones was slowly, gently, finding its way into her heart over the next few days. Emily found herself drawn to the narrow streets and quiet corners of Malta, where the sunlight spilled golden on limestone walls and the air carried the salty scent of the sea, and Daniel Reed was always nearby, guiding her with calm confidence, sharing stories that made the past feel alive, yet never overloading her with facts, instead letting history breathe naturally as they walked together, and Emily began to notice the way he listened, not just to her words but to pauses, to the things left unsaid, and she realized that in Toronto, he had spent years chasing stories that mattered, not for fame or recognition, but because he believed that every life, every choice, was a battle worth understanding, and he spoke gently of a knight who had defended Malta not with swords or armies, but with courage and hope, who had faced what seemed impossible and endured, and Emily found herself captivated, not only by the story, but by the quiet strength of the man telling it, a strength that did not demand attention but invited trust, and as they moved through marketplaces where the smell of fresh bread mingled with the sea air, and through quiet courtyards where pigeons cooed without fear, Emily shared fragments of her own story, the love she had lost slowly, without anger or drama, only sadness, and Daniel never interrupted or tried to fix her grief. He only nodded and asked questions that mattered, and each conversation built an invisible bridge between them, strong but tender. And sometimes, as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the harbor, Emily noticed how Daniel's gaze lingered, how his hand brushed lightly against hers by accident or chance, and it made her heart race in ways she hadn't expected, because she was used to walls, to keeping distance, yet here, with him, she felt the possibility of connection without pressure, and they spoke of resilience and the power of hope, of the idea that sometimes the fiercest battles were fought in silence, in moments of doubt and fear that no one else could see, and Emily began to see herself in the story of the night. Recognizing the small acts of bravery in her own life, the courage it took to leave behind what she loved, the strength to keep walking forward even when her heart felt heavy, and Daniel, in turn, shared pieces of his own past, how he had once let fear guide him, letting opportunities for love slip by because he was afraid of vulnerability, and hearing him speak so honestly made Emily ache with empathy and fascination, realizing that this man, like her, had known loss, yet he had not given up. And they laughed together over small jokes, shared meals in quiet cafes where the air smelled of coffee and fresh pastries, and Emily began to feel a strange mixture of comfort and excitement, as if she were discovering not only a new place but a new possibility for herself. And at night, when the streets grew empty and the lights reflected in the water, she thought about the night's story, about the 40,000 invaders not being soldiers but fears and doubts, and she understood that what they were building together was not rushed or superficial but rooted in mutual respect and shared understanding. And each day, Daniel encouraged her to explore, to notice the small details that made Malta so alive, the birds nesting in the arches, the laughter of children chasing each other across squares, the way the sunset turned the walls golden, and Emily felt herself opening in ways she had not allowed for years, her thoughts softening, her heart cautious but willing, and she began to hope. Quietly, not demanding love but allowing it to exist in the spaces between their conversations, in the shared silences, in the gentle brush of hands when reaching for the same book in a small shop. And Daniel noticed her subtle reactions, the way her eyes brightened at small wonders, the way she hesitated before speaking of certain memories, and he matched her pace, never pushing, always present, making Emily realize that trust could be a delicate, beautiful thing, built not in grand gestures, but in consistency. And in moments when the wind carried the scent of the sea into quiet streets, they paused together, looking out over the horizon, feeling both the vastness of the world and the closeness of each other, and Emily began to understand that the night she had been learning about was not just a figure from history but a reflection of the courage it took to be human, to love, to risk heartbreak. And as she walked alongside Daniel, sharing thoughts, stories, and laughter, she felt a stirring inside her she had not felt in years, a mixture of longing, curiosity, and a gentle attraction, one that did not rush but whispered, inviting her to explore, to trust, and to feel. And by the end of their days together, Emily realized that Malta had become more than a destination. It was a place of quiet transformation, where walls that had once represented protection now seemed to symbolize endurance, and where she and Daniel, two travelers from faraway cities, had begun to discover that the truest stories were those written in the heart, in moments of connection, understanding, and shared silence, leaving Emily with a sense of anticipation she could not yet name, and a longing to see what the next day, the next conversation, and the next glance might bring. As the days in Malta passed, Emily felt a quiet tension growing between her and Daniel, something neither had named but both felt, like the air before a storm, charged with energy and possibility. And one evening, as the sun dipped low over the harbor, painting the sky in gold and rose, Daniel finally spoke with a hesitancy that made Emily's heart tighten, admitting that he had loved before, deeply and fully, only to step back out of fear, leaving the person he cared for behind. And Emily listened, her own memories of lost love rising alongside his words, a mix of sorrow and understanding that made her feel both connected and vulnerable. And in that shared space, something shifted. The stories they had exchanged, the quiet walks and laughter, the long talks by the sea, suddenly carried a weight she could not ignore. And Emily realized that her attraction to Daniel was more than curiosity. It was an acknowledgement of the comfort and strength he offered, the kind of understanding that felt rare and sacred. Yet at the same time, fear whispered in her mind, warning her that opening her heart again could lead to pain, a caution she had learned too well. But standing next to him as the waves lapped at the rocks below, she felt the pull to take a chance, to trust in the moment rather than in the ghosts of past disappointments, and Daniel, noticing her stillness, reached out, lightly touching her hand, an electric but gentle contact that made her pulse quicken, and they spoke then not of history or legends, but of themselves, of choices, regrets, hopes, and the longing to be seen fully, without pretense, and Emily felt tears rise, not of sadness, but of relief, that someone else could hold her story without judgment, and Daniel admitted that he had held back from others before because he feared the vulnerability that connection required, but with her, he wanted to try, even if it scared him, and the honesty between them built a fragile bridge, stronger than any stone wall, and as night fell, the city lights shimmering on the water, Emily and Daniel walked silently through quiet streets, the air cool and comforting, their hands brushing, their shoulders occasionally touching, each contact a question and an answer, and Emily felt herself drawn to him, not just in the way hearts often leap at romance, but in the deeper sense of recognition, of finding someone whose soul seemed to mirror parts of hers she had long hidden, and yet the fear lingered, a quiet whisper reminding her that the past could repeat itself if she was not careful, and they paused on a terrace overlooking the sea, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and flowers, and Daniel spoke of the night again, the one who had faced overwhelming odds not with violence but with patience and courage, who had learned that the true battles were within, against fear and doubt, and Emily saw the parallel clearly. Both of them were standing at the edge of a siege, not of armies, but of their own hearts, deciding whether to step forward or retreat, and she felt the thrill and terror of choice, of allowing herself to feel fully again, and Daniel's hand found hers, steady and warm, and she realized that she did not have to answer every fear, did not have to solve every question tonight, all she had to do was be present, to trust that the connection they had nurtured could grow slowly, carefully, and beautifully, and as they walked back through the narrow streets, past lanterns glowing softly and the quiet murmurs of the city settling into night, Emily noticed how Daniel's presence was both grounding and freeing, how he could be serious without stiffness, playful without distraction, and thoughtful without overbearing, and she understood that love, if it came now, would not be a rush or a storm but a patient, deliberate unfolding, like the tides themselves, and yet the longing was undeniable, a magnetic pull that made her pulse and breath catch, a reminder that hearts remember their own needs even when minds are cautious, and that night, in the quiet of her room, she replayed every word, every glance, every subtle touch, and felt a mixture of exhilaration and fear, knowing that something significant was blossoming, fragile yet irresistible, and that tomorrow could change everything, that the next moment could bring clarity or heartbreak, and as she fell asleep, the line from the letter she had found earlier returned to her mind, about the greatest siege being fought within the soul, and Emily realized she and Daniel were in the midst of their own siege, navigating the delicate space between longing and fear, attraction and hesitation, and that whatever came next, the lessons of courage, trust, and honesty would shape the story they were beginning to write together, a story not of conquest but of connection, of hearts learning to meet across the spaces they had built, and the soft whisper of the sea outside her window seemed to promise that if they remained true to themselves, the siege of their hearts could be overcome, not by force, but by willingness to be seen, to be brave, and to let love arrive quietly, steadily, and profoundly, leaving Emily with the bittersweet ache of anticipation and the undeniable hope that something beautiful was unfolding, something worth every risk, every doubt, every tender heartbeat that had brought them to this shared, fragile, and thrilling moment. The next morning, Emily woke to the soft light spilling across her room and the memory of the previous night heavy in her chest, her thoughts tangled between hope and fear, because Daniel had vanished before dawn, leaving only a simple note on the desk, carefully folded and written in his familiar, precise hand, and she read it again and again, each word a mixture of honesty and hesitation, explaining that he had considered leaving, afraid of where their connection might lead. And Emily's heart tightened at the thought of him gone, yet she also understood his fear, knowing that both of them carried past wounds that made trust fragile, and she hurried through the quiet streets, following a feeling she could not name, until she reached the old stone walls that had drawn her here in the first place, and there, against the rising sun and the shimmer of the sea, she found Daniel, his gaze searching the horizon and then settling on her as she approached, and he confessed that leaving had seemed easier than facing the intensity of what they were becoming, but that he could no longer deny the truth of his feelings. The way her presence had begun to change him, soften him, awaken him to hope he had long avoided, and Emily felt a rush of relief and longing, realizing that the vulnerability they both feared was exactly what had been drawing them closer, and she reached for his hand, warm and steady, and they stood together in silence, letting the waves below remind them that life moved forward whether they were cautious or not, and in that quiet moment, without words, they understood each other more fully than any conversation could convey, that the real victories were not in grand gestures but in the willingness to stay, to be present, to choose connection over fear. And Daniel finally spoke of the knight, the one who had defended Malta not through battle but by refusing to surrender to despair, whose courage had saved countless lives by inspiring others. And Emily saw clearly the parallel to their own story, realizing that love could be a kind of siege too, where hearts were tested by doubt, past pain, and the risk of loss, and surviving it required patience, honesty, and bravery, not domination or control. And as they walked along the walls together, the wind carrying the salt and warmth of the sea, their fingers intertwined, Emily felt the armor she had carried for so long slowly fall away, replaced by trust, anticipation, and a gentle kind of joy she had thought she might never feel again. And Daniel matched her pace, careful, attentive, speaking softly about hopes for the future and the importance of staying true to themselves, and in return, Emily shared her own desires, her cautious optimism, and the quiet lessons she had learned from heartache, and each step strengthened the bond between them, a connection built not on perfection but on authenticity, compassion, and shared courage. And they paused at a lookout where the horizon seemed endless, the sunlight glimmering on the water, and in that space, words were unnecessary. The promise was in their presence, in the way their shoulders brushed, the warmth of their hands together, the unspoken understanding that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. And Emily realized that Malta had changed her, teaching her that walls could protect but also inspire, that the greatest victories were over fear and self-doubt, and that love, when approached with honesty and patience, could feel like home. And Daniel, noticing her thoughtful smile, leaned slightly closer, and she felt a surge of emotion, a mix of excitement, relief, and tenderness, knowing that their story was just beginning, fragile yet resilient. And as they descended the walls together, walking toward the city that hummed softly with life waking around them, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the chance encounters, the shared stories, the laughter, and the silences that had built a bridge between two hearts. And she knew that the knight's true victory had been in standing firm when all seemed lost, choosing courage over retreat, and that same choice now lived in both of them, in the decision to meet each other fully, to trust again, to allow love to enter without fear. And as they wandered through narrow streets, the scent of the sea and warm bread around them, their hands still clasped, Emily felt a calm strength she had not known she possessed, a willingness to embrace the uncertainty of the future while holding tightly to this present. And Daniel's presence beside her was a steady reminder that connection required both vulnerability and patience, and that the heart could endure, could heal, and could open again when met with care and honesty. And as the day unfolded with sunlight and laughter from the city, Emily and Daniel walked side by side, not rushing, not demanding, simply being together, feeling the slow but undeniable pull of a bond that promised growth, understanding, and perhaps the beginning of a love that would not need to be loud to be real. And with every step, every glance, every shared smile, they built a quiet story of resilience, trust, and hope, knowing that the walls behind them had witnessed many battles, but the one they had chosen to fight together, the siege of their hearts, was already a victory, and that in the gentle triumph of courage, honesty, and mutual respect, they had found a love that could last, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, tender, and brave enough to endure the tides of life, leaving them walking forward, hands intertwined, hearts lighter, souls connected, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, with the knowledge that sometimes the strongest castles were not made of stone, but of two hearts willing to stand together, unafraid.